Representative Harold Love Jr. represents the 58th District in the Tennessee General Assembly. More information at capital.tn.gov. He now joins us on Decision Makers. Always good to have you, Representative.
Really glad to be back on. Thank you for the opportunity.
Excellent, excellent. So I always ask this question when I'm interviewing lawmakers such as yourself, and I want to get to know, I want our audience to get to know the 58th District better. So talk about the cities, the counties, the spaces that it encompasses. Talk about the people in it, if you will.
Sure. Well, the 58th District is part of Nashville, Tennessee, and it's a larger part of the North Nashville and Bordeaux areas, also encompassing South Nashville and East Nashville areas. And for those who may be acquainted with our HBCUs in Nashville, the 58th District has within it Tennessee State University, Fisk University, Meharry Medical College, and American Baptist College. It also has Trevecca Nazarene University. And so that gives you that good understanding of what I would like to refer to as a good educational legislative district. And that's important to note because when we're in the legislature and we're debating issues and topics around many policy issues, it's good to know that you have people who have a certain district that leans itself to that. For example, I would want to have persons on the agricultural committee that have a good number of farms and maybe agricultural businesses in their district. I would want persons who are on healthcare committee to maybe have a good number of healthcare facilities in their district. And so in the same vein, to be able to have served on the education committee for many years, I leaned upon the fact that I had 5 institutions of higher education, 4 particular HBCUs in my district. And it's a growing area. I mean, Nashville is growing. Anytime if you just Google Nashville growth, you will see estimates of at least 100 people a day moving here for job transfer, some moving here because of economic issues where they live currently. And it's a good place, I think, to grow. The only challenge we have, well, one of the challenges we have is the cost of living, because with the increase in population, increase in businesses, increase in density, naturally it's then going to shrink the available housing stock. It's also going to increase the cost of living. And though we have those wonderful things like the Super Bowl coming here in 2030, it still begs the question of, is it going to be a growth for everybody? And so that's just a quick estimate of what we have in the 58th District. I'll give you an overview of what we have in the district and what it looks like.
Yeah, what are the characteristics of people who are moving into Nashville every day?
It varies. Again, when you have companies that are relocating their headquarters to Nashville, oftentimes they bring with them their employees. Mm-hmm. Also, you have persons who may be moving here because Nashville's climate is a bit more balanced, meaning that if we have winter days, there are not going to be a lot of snow days. There may be a week or 2 of snow, but not a lot of snow. Also, we don't have the extreme heat in Nashville. And so for persons who want to come to an area where there is a balance of climate, people have found that to be an attractive thing. Also, you talk about the city of Nashville having within it so many things like professional football team, professional hockey team, professional soccer team, and of course, I think it's AAA baseball team. And so you have those attractions available as well.
You know what? I would like to go over real quickly the demographics of your district. What is that? Racial, economic, other characteristics as well?
Sure. So the racial makeup is just a little bit north of 56% African American.
Okay.
And of course, that comes from the fact that we do have a lot of people who are moving to the district who are not African American. The 58th District was not drawn to be a voting rights district. So I want to make that clear because I know amidst this conversation about voting rights and majority minority districts. Ours was not one that was drawn that way, but it just happened to be that way because of the population. The income varies because you have a lot of retired persons living in the 58th district, but you also have a lot of people, again, who are moving in the district because it's close to downtown, it's close to a lot of the interstates, and so that income range is a little bit north of, I think, $80,000, which, again, unfortunately, becomes that amount of money that is needed to live in the city of Nashville. And that also displaces a lot of people because they don't have that income range coming in.
Talking with Representative Harold Love here, once again, representing the 58th District of the state of Tennessee. And, we talked about the characteristics of that district. Got a lot of HBCUs there. So that's interesting, including at 1890 University, Tennessee State University. That's somewhat of a, do you find that can be a challenge or something of a balancing act? Do you find any resistance from the legislatures, mostly Republican legislature? Obviously Nashville being a former Confederate state, so it's a Southern legacy state. Obviously the politics, the history there being a bit shaky as it relates to African Americans, very problematic. So do you get that kind of resistance, or do you find in the legislature you can get support, as far as their, but, especially a state-run, state-owned university like TSU?
So what I found, and this is what I love about the district, is that we have different HBCUs. And by that, I mean this. You point out that we have an 1890 land grant in Tennessee State University, but we also have a medical college in Meharry Medical College, and we have a liberal arts college in Fisk University. And then, of course, we have a faith-based, primarily religious-based, but not exclusively based, American Baptist College. And so they don't compete with each other. They complement each other. You oftentimes will have programs that are allowing students to cross enroll and pursue classes at either any of the universities. You also have feeders. Tennessee State has a great feeder program with the Levi Watkins Institute that will help feed students into Meharry Medical College. I know Fisk also has some programs. But for Tennessee State University, to your question, I've not found that we have extreme challenges with the legislature. I do know that what happens oftentimes when you're talking about state funding for universities, you're competing with several things. One, you're competing generally just with the state budget, right? You're dealing with the fact that people will all be asking for something from the budget. Economics being the allocation of scarce resources, everybody wants part of the budget. Then you get to the higher education piece. Tennessee State is in a category where it's a 4-year college with also graduate degrees available. But that puts it at odds, I to that in general, puts it at odds with other 4-year institutions who also want funding from the state. Then you also have them competing with what we call Tennessee Colleges of Applied Technologies. These are schools where persons can go and learn a trade. They can get a skill in 2 or 3 years. And then we also have our community colleges. These oftentimes are 2-year institutions that allow persons who may not want to do the full 4 years at a university to do 2 years, get an associate's degree, or do that 2 years and then transfer to a 4-year. And so TSU is competing not just for funding with the 4-year institutions, but also with the 2-year and the other institutions. And that becomes a challenge sometimes because when you're talking about building maintenance, when you're talking about scholarships that are available primarily at each institution, it is those building issues that cause most concern, because dormitories, residence halls, academic buildings, they all degrade in their structure, and they're hard to repair, and they cost a lot. And that's been the subject of conversation for many years at the Capitol, is how do we get to the place where we can sufficiently address the issues of deferred maintenance on our college and campus.
What are the issues or challenges that constituents come to you the most? Do those issues that are big concern to your constituents, is it a tension between those, or do they come in conflict with the legislature, with what the legislature is focused on?
I think the last few years, the concerns of my constituents centered around these subject areas.
Yeah.
Gun violence, right? After we had the shooting here at Covenant School in Nashville, it again awakened the need for some gun reform. And many constituents were concerned about safety for their children, safety for themselves in their religious institutions where they would go to worship, and also safety, again, in situations where they're just out in public. That's one issue. Also, the issue of affordable housing, because as Nashville began to grow and began to reduce its affordable housing stock, that began to spread to other counties around Nashville. So constituents came with concerns about how could we at the state level increase stock for affordable housing. That also led to concerns about issues around property taxes. And if there was any way at the state level to increase opportunities for people to have a reduction in their property taxes. And of course, there's always concern about access to good affordable health care because of the myriad of issues that people face with their own healthcare challenges. And so those are just some of the issues that I've had constituents come to me about. And if you look at my legislative package, I think you may find that as a result, I began to shape my policy agenda around issues just like that. As a result, had a chance to address the issue around property taxes because we have a program in Tennessee that allows persons of 62 years or older to freeze their property taxes at a certain level, no matter what the house around them sell for, no matter how much in value their house increases, they can freeze their property tax payment at that amount. The problem was this: the income level was capped at close to $44,000 in Nashville. In some other places in the state, the income was capped at $34,000. So if you can imagine that, right? Not being able to qualify for a property tax relief program or freeze program because you made $35,000 in one county or $45,000 in Nashville. Again, these are retired persons. So I was blessed and very fortunate to be able to pass legislation that raised that salary cap to $60,000. My goal was $80,000, but of course, sometimes you have to take less than what you're asking for to get some things passed. But we did see an increase in persons who signed up for the program, and many persons who were retired teachers thanked me for the advocacy in that regard. So that's how I usually shape my policy agenda, to hear what constituents are concerned about and then work on relieving those issues.
You work on relieving those issues, able to get that bill passed. Other bills that that you passed in this previous session, can you highlight those? But also, how are you able to reach across the aisle, strike those compromises, cut those deals?
Sure. So this will be going into my 15th year, barring any hiccups during the election, for the legislature. And what I've learned over the last 14 years is how to have conversations with my colleagues that center the policy concern around all constituents, and not just those constituents in the 58th district, not just those who are African American. For example, passed legislation several years ago around sickle cell, increasing access for persons with sickle cell to be able to see their doctors in the doctor office if they were on the state healthcare plan, or rather than waiting to go to the emergency room. Also passed legislation around sickle cell requiring the state's healthcare plan to evaluate new and innovative treatments for sickle cell. So when I talk to my colleagues about the need to increase access for patients with sickle cell, I had to center it in the fact that if we got these patients more treatment earlier, that it might relieve pressure in the emergency rooms. And that resonated with them because that then translated to, if there's less pressure in the emergency rooms, there may be more availability for persons to get into the emergency rooms. So once we had those conversations about that, it was able to get passed successfully. This past year, had a conversation about a bill that would allow persons with communication disorders to file for a special license plate, not that says that they have the disorder, but that when the police officer puts their license plate in their information database, it comes up that they have communication issues, either with autism or with speech impediments or other communication disorders. This then triggers for the police officer or law enforcement officer to then ask for assistance in communicating with the person, but also to be more aware of what their communication needs are. That resonated with my colleagues because we situated that in the fact of not just for African Americans, not just for persons in 50th district, but for all Tennesseans.
Mm-hmm. So I see, you're saying where your policy concerns, policy priorities of those of your constituents align with legislators from other parts of the state. So
Sure.
you can find those openings. Let's talk about the work on past session on the constitutionally mandated budget for
Mhm.
Tennessee. You have to pass that budget according to the Constitution. So I think it was like a nearly $60 billion budget. You were able to finish that based on revenue for the state. I think it was like what close to like 2.4% revenue growth for nearly $500 million drawn in revenue to feed into that budget. But what challenges did you come up against when you had to pass that budget? Because states are finding many constraints, right? I talked to legislators in various legislatures and assemblies, and obviously the budgets are getting tighter in this new economic climate. So how were you able to pass a budget, considering that everyone's living or all these legislatures are having to face much tighter budgets, also constraints based on the economy, the state economy, and also the overall national outlook?
So I think the harsh reality that we all have to face now is that even with the awareness that the COVID relief dollars were not going to last forever,
Mm-hmm.
when we received them, we, of course, spent them. And again, we knew that they weren't going to last forever. But the reality of having that huge influx of cash, uh, I think, still made it a bit difficult coming off of that, right? So, the money's here temporarily in the sense that you get it for this year, for this next year, but it won't be forever. You plan your budget based upon the fact that it will not be there forever. And yet, when you come off of it, you have to then have a conversation about the fact that we knew this was coming. And so I think for Tennessee, like many other states, we did budget items based upon one-time cost, but it still provided some relief to the general budget itself because we knew we had those federal dollars in. And so now what we're in is a period where we're dealing with now the reality of not having those dollars in place, which means that we must deal with the fact that maybe revenue growth is not where it was because that was seen as revenue. There's also this piece of understanding that places like Tennessee, where we have almost $36 billion in tourist money coming in, and about 14 or 13 billion coming from Nashville specifically, we must also understand that even though we have those tourist dollars coming in, your budget is based upon surely some conservative estimates, right? Because you cannot guarantee that just because you have those tourist dollars come in one year, that they'll always come in. But that's what a budget is. A budget is really taking what you took in last year, looking at it, looking at the prior month's receivables and saying, okay, if we have these receivables here, are we going to actually get those, right? Will those really be paid out, or are these things that we have to write up on our balance sheet? And so that's, I think, the budgeting process is to look at and say, what are we going to put in place? Now, I would tell you, actually, one of the difficulties I do have is the fact that we adjourned so early in the year that we don't, I think, get a full picture of our budget. So we adjourn in mid-April, which means we're missing the actual budget numbers from April, from May, and from June. We don't have the full picture of the budget. And in previous years, we did stay a little bit longer in the year to be able to get a bigger estimate of what we had coming in because we had those actual numbers from April and from May. And so we have a situation where this particular budget was different also because this was the current governor's last budget, which means that, of course, he had certain budget items that he wanted to make sure he got taken care of. And one thing particularly that we wrestled over was this issue of educational school vouchers. And of course, this is a situation where the state of Tennessee would take public dollars from our general fund and allow parents, if they wanted to opt in, to get somewhere north of $7,000 to enroll their child in private school. The biggest concern many of us had was the fact that not only would this take money from the general fund, but there also was a guarantee from our colleagues that any county that had students to leave out of that county to go to a private school would still be guaranteed to get that previous year's budget amount from the state. And so you know that at some point, this is not going to work out mathematically because if I have students who are leaving and going to a private school and my student population is reducing, that means that I have a hole in my budget. But if the state says they're going to fill that hole every year, that means that there's money coming out of the state budget to fill that hole. And the question has to be asked, where's the money coming from? Because it wasn't promised initially to come from that. It was a situation where if you had a child leave from the public school system and go to the private school, then that county would just lose that money. But this was put in there to sweeten the deal and to get folks to vote for it. And that was a major concern for ourselves. Also, we had a previous year about $1.5 billion in business taxes that were returned to some businesses who claimed that they were taxed at the wrong level. They threatened a lawsuit. The state paid the $1.5 billion, and that again was money that was coming out of our general fund.
Yeah. Did that summer childhood food program, did that survive the process? Because I remember at one point, the governor, he was rejecting that. He didn't want to sign it.
I'm glad you brought that up because that was money that we didn't have to pay out. It was federal grant coming down. Mm-hmm. The governor rejected that. The legislature responded by passing legislation requiring him to then go back in and apply for those dollars. But, the real concern we had was you had a huge amount of young people in the summertime who were not going to be getting supplemental food because we chose to do a smaller program funded by the state rather than use a larger, more robust program funded by federal dollars. I think that's the situation where we must be cognizant of the fact that, we can't just wholesale sign off on rejecting federal dollars and not fill it back in with state dollars.
Mm-hmm. So one of the biggest issues right now, I know you're dealing with that, and also your other colleagues, especially as it relates to the Black caucus there in the legislature, redistricting, gerrymandering.
Yes.
So that's nationwide, especially in those former Jim Crow states like Tennessee. So what's the status of that battle right now?
It's very difficult for many of us because after a long fought battle like the one that we experienced this past session, and having one of our colleagues, Representative G.A. Hardaway, to die, on the heel of his funeral, we got notice that we were going back into special session the next week. On that Friday, we got the notice. We went back in on a Tuesday. And many of us had concerns about the fact that it was not required because the district that they were dividing up was not drawn to be in accordance with the Voting Rights Act. And so this caused us to try to appeal to our colleagues to understand that this was a majority Black congressional district. There were instances where other large cities weren't being divided up. They insisted that it was party line driven and not racially driven. We asked questions about, did they not understand the racial makeup of Shelby County and Memphis, Tennessee? Many of them denied they knew that it was a majority Black city, which also, caused some consternation on our side because we're saying, listen, let's just be honest and say what it is and not get into the space where you act like you don't know that you're dividing up a majority Black district. And coincidentally, when they divide the district up, the new district that they put people in had almost the exact same percentage of Black voters in those districts. So it went from a 60% Black district in District 9 to Districts 8 and 5, and I believe 9, ended up with 30 to 29% Black population accidentally, right? That there was no intent on their part. But what it did also, it made us resolve to help our colleagues in other states like South Carolina, like Georgia, like Mississippi, like Florida, to encourage them to push back in ways that we could not. So happy to look at Georgia and see that they did not draw their maps new this year, to see South Carolina did not do it, to see Mississippi did not do it. And so that's to remind us that it could have been done a different way. But I keep going back to the fact that even with the Supreme Court ruling, what we had in Tennessee was not violating their ruling. And so it was not necessary to do this. Also, the short notice that people got about what congressional district they were going to be in, the voter confusion. I went from having these 4 HBCUs all in District number 7 to now one is in 7 and one is in District number 6.
So, I want to get your take on this. Could this, in some ways, this redistricting plan, primarily from Republicans, could this backfire on them? So what I mean by that is, let's take Memphis, for example. I saw that map where that proposed map, there were districts where it wanted to expand or include more white rural voters. For example, you're splitting up the black votes. Just like you explained, you're splitting up black voters over several districts. In each district, you have fewer black voters because they've been diluted out of that one majority black district. So, but you'll still find large clusters of black voters in those districts. Maybe in some instances, I don't know, you're more of an expert on this. Maybe in some instances, they kind of outnumber the white rural voters. So I don't know. So you have that. You have more black people from up north reverse migrating into states like Tennessee. You would say Tennessee's growing. I do hear that a lot up here in the north. Black people, just anecdotally, a lot of black people up here in the north saying, I like Tennessee. I wanted that as a potential state to move to. So you have that happening. I'm also showing or also seeing a recent poll that was saying a plurality of white voters said they would be open to voting for black candidates. So all those factors combined, do you see potential for this type of plan backfiring on Republicans?
Sure. So I would say this, and I would use historical context, say it like this. If it were up to black folks alone, we would have ended slavery on our own if we could. But it took the cooperation of non-black persons to help us to end slavery. If it had been up to black folks alone, we would have passed Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Act. But we needed people who were not black to also join our cause, who recognized that this type of action would be detrimental to the entire country as a whole. And so in that regard, I think we have an opportunity if black voters increase their turnout, and if we get non-black voters who also recognize that this was unnecessary and it was unfair to those voters in Memphis to have this done to them, then I think you'd have a majority of people who would collectively say, this is wrong. This is not how we view things to be done in Tennessee. This is not going to help us move forward as a state or as a country. Because if you go back to the very premise of why this was done, it was not done just because of the Supreme Court decision. It was done because the President of the United States requested help in getting an additional congressional seat that he believed would help retain the majority of Republicans in leadership in the House of Representatives, and thereby, in his estimation, make it easier for his agenda to be carried out after midterms. So when you look at it from that perspective, then what you say is, it again was not in violation of any Supreme Court decision, and this was done at the request of a president. And at some point, I think the people of Tennessee, black, white, all races, all ages, all political affiliations, would want to at least stand together to say, this is not how we want our state to be run when it comes to drawing congressional lines. Think about it. The lines are so drawn that you have, I'm not sure how familiar you are with Nashville and with Tennessee, but you have Graceland in Memphis, now in the same congressional district as a shopping mall in a county right below Nashville. You then also have the Graceland Museum in a different district than Graceland itself, and it's in the same congressional district as the Best Buy in that same county right below Nashville. And so one has asked the question, are these lines drawn to give people in those areas the best representation that they can get? And I think that's what should galvanize voters in all those counties to say, we want better drawn maps. We want maps that keeps counties and communities together who have things in common. When it comes down to Nashville and Memphis and Knoxville and Chattanooga, those are large urban areas. And when you put them in congressional districts with rural areas, then it makes it difficult for the member of Congress to balance out how he or she will serve that district because they're going to have different needs. I think that's what I hope will happen. I think it is possible that the people, black, white, all races, all ages, all genders, will get together, all political affiliations, and say, for this election, we need to demonstrate to those who drew these lines that this is not how we want our state run.
Is that campaign taking place right now, trying to motivate black voters, white voters, and those districts, or in that new district, for example, that's been carved out or carved up, just to try to illuminate or illustrate to them, hey, this is wrong. Or, we need to come up with a better plan, a better way of operating or conducting our politics.
Sure, and I'll say this: here's the unintended consequence of their actions. It didn't just affect Shelby County. Again, it's affected my congressional district, and so it's affected districts all across the state. And so now, what you have a situation is members of Congress who had filed for re-election and running in certain counties are now having counties either added to or taken away from their very own former district that they had last year. And so I would hope that voters all across the state would push back and would vote in mass to demonstrate that this is not how we want this done. Because here's the problem. If we don't do that, then what's to stop them from changing it 2 years from now? And so, yes, I think what we'll find is candidates across the state who want this to not be the norm are saying this in their speeches and in their meetings, that we have to all collectively get together and look beyond our political lines and vote against this issue.
All right. Thanks again, Representative, for your time. Really appreciate that. We're done with this episode of Decision Makers. I'm Charles Ellison, your executive producer and host. A warm round of gratitude to the Council of State Governments, our partner, especially the Council on Communities of Color, which is based in the Eastern region. You can find this episode and more while you are subscribing at thebnote.com. Thanks for watching. Stay safe out there.